You're listening to the Jam Price Show, all about movies. And today, my guest is journalist and wife of Oleg Vidor, Joan Borsten Vidor. And we're going to be talking about this amazing documentary entitled Oleg, which is all about her husband, who was this incredible actor that not many Americans probably are that familiar with. So we're going to do a deep dive into this documentary. So thank you so much, Joan, for being on the show.
The last name is Vidov.
Oh, Vidalva. Okay, I didn't get it right. Thank you, Vidalva. So let's talk about how this documentary came about.
So, I used to work for the Los Angeles Times Calendar, and I was based first in Tel Aviv and then in Rome. And I literally traveled from Morocco to India and Poland to West Africa. And one day I was in New Delhi interviewing the fortune teller of the great Italian filmmaker Federico Fellini. So this was back in the days before we had internet, and Fellini used to mail him scripts. And the guru would say, yes, make it or don't make it. And Fellini would either listen or not listen. But at the end of the interview, he took my hand and he said, you're going to marry a man from a strange country. So I thought, okay. And they sent me to a lot of strange countries, but no Romeo. And then I went home to Rome. And while I was gone, the Robert Redford of the Soviet Union had illegally crossed into Austria and from Austria to Rome and come to the home of my friends in order to go to the US Embassy and defect. And by chance, I was staying with those same friends because I had a new apartment available in Rome and it wasn't available for another month.
And that's how you met him.
That's how I met him. That was the beginning of a 32-year marriage.
Wow, wow. And he was gorgeous. I think he's better looking than Robert Redford, and I'm a huge Robert Redford fan. But when that's how the
I didn't really know how gorgeous he was until we got to Los Angeles and Russian women started fainting in front of me.
Wow, wow, wow. No, I mean, I'm a huge Robert Redford fan, always have been, always will be. I have a picture of him on my refrigerator on a magnet. So, and I've met Robert Redford through the years, but anyhow, but your husband was stunning, actually. So, I mean, how did this documentary come about, Joan?
So, in the last 3 years before he passed, he had an incurable cancer. He was writing his autobiography. And when he passed, he left me a list of 60 people in 8 countries who I should interview in order to finish certain chapters.
Wow.
So, I was born and raised in the film industry, and with him, I was in the film industry. So I talked to my friends, and we all thought, you know what, this is probably a documentary. So we decided that as I ran around the world interviewing people for his book, we would film the interviews. And after we'd filmed them, it was clear that we should film more interviews. And it became a major project in many countries. And we finished it just about, I guess, really, it wasn't quite finished when COVID hit. And we still had some interviews to do, which we managed somehow to finally get done. And then we had the hard work of putting it all together, but it was a very exciting adventure.
I can imagine it would be. You I mean, there's so much to this actually, because there's so much footage of him, obviously, in his acting career, but the footage also of other times throughout his life too. So you met him, and then you did get married, and you said a 32-year marriage, but he had been married twice before, and a big part of this film is his first marriage. Do you mind diving into that a little bit about who he married initially?
So this was the Soviet Union, a very closed country, and we were in a Cold War with them. But it wasn't like here where you know exactly who the president is married to and who his children are and who his relatives are and whatever. So Oleg was at a restaurant in Moscow one night, and this woman came over, and her name was Natalia Fedotova. That was what he knew, and he was very taken with her. And then her friend arrived and she said, "Oh, Oleg Vidov, whatever." And it turned out that it was the daughter of Brezhnev, who was the head of Russia. But of course, nobody could recognize her. And she was a major force in the life of his wife. She was a lot older than the wife, but the wife really liked power, and Galina provided access to power that Natalia never would have had.
And so when she met Oleg, that was also another step up in power because he was such a popular actor in Russia at that point in time. Is that correct?
Yes, and for years, the Russian yellow press claimed that Galina and Natalia dictate who his star was going to be.
Oh, really? Can you repeat that? You froze up a little bit. So can you just repeat that last sentence?
I said the yellow press in Russia for years claimed that he became a star because Galina Brezhnev and his wife Natalia had gone to various directors and said, "You have to hire this man." So, first of all, it was before he ever met them. And secondly, what good director would ever let the daughter of the president dictate who he was going to put in his film?
Right, right.
I mean, maybe in a little part, but not in the lead.
This is true. So did that was also pivotal as to what happened to his career, that marriage. Can you do a little, can you tell our audience a little bit further about how that marriage affected his career, not only positively but negatively?
So, because I think that a lot of what's happening in the Soviet Union, in the Russia today, is reflected in this movie. Maybe it was different after the Soviet Union fell, but it's gone back to that. So, according to the law in the Soviet Union, there was community property. So, first of all, he found out that she divorced him unilaterally, which was illegal. And then he found out that the court had given her all of his side of the communal property. So he decided to go to court. And when he got to the judge liked him because he played her grandfather in a movie. And so she said to him very daringly, she said, "Oleg, there are laws and there are phone calls, and I got a phone call."
Oh, wow.
So if you think back about Navalny, if you think back about all these other cases we know about, I mean, those cases were all decided based on a phone call.
Yeah, yeah. And you're right, it hasn't changed, right, in all these years. So, so let's talk a little bit about, so you two got married, and then what happened?
So Oleg got here in 1985. There were huge headlines across the country. But you know what? It was the Cold War. Our screenwriters were not writing scripts for good-looking Russians. So he got his first break with Arnold Schwarzenegger playing his partner. It wasn't a big role, but it was a good one. And then he did other films like Wild Orchid with Mickey Rourke. But he kind of realized that it was going to be a long time before they were casting good-looking Russians. So he went back to Moscow in 1991 to make a movie for a Danish production for Denmark. And he went to the library of the Russian animation library. The Russians had Stalin loved films. And in 1932, I think there was a Walt Disney Festival in Moscow. He saw Walt Disney Animation. He decided to create a Russian animation studio as good as Disney. So Oleg and every other Soviet child grew up on that animation. So he went to the animation studio and he said, "Let me make our animation famous around the world. Our animation is better than everybody else's, and all we have to do is get it out there." So they agreed. And he came back to me and he said, "Oh, we're going to distribute this famous Russian library." And I said, "And who are you going to sell it to, Oleg?" And he said, "Oh, don't worry." So unfortunately, when the films arrived, they were not in good shape, and we had to restore them. And for him, it was like minute by minute, second by second, cost a fortune. Um, but we partnered with Baryshnikov. We revoiced it with all these famous actors who were really happy. They really loved what they were doing. And he sold it to 55 countries around the world, including PBS here and Bravo, HBO.
Wow, wow. But and you had the rights to the animation for how many years?
until 2006. So in 2000, so the Russians always thought the animation had no value. So when they saw that it had value, they decided to try to steal it back, and we all ended up in a federal court in New York. We won, and then they called and said, we want to buy it back. Instead of steal it back, they wanted to buy it back. So I said, okay. And so we negotiated for a while, and they paid, and we gave them back the animation, which they've never ever used.
You're kidding. So
No,
all
it's
that work,
all of the materials are still sitting in North Hollywood in a vault.
they never took them over. They never went back to Russia, but they own them and you can't do anything with them. What a shame. What a shame because you show some of in the film, in the documentary, you show uh, some of the animation and they are beautiful. They're just so uniquely different than anything we've seen in this country and just really just truly beautiful. What a shame that piece of history is not being shown, especially to film students and people who are in animation. What are your thoughts about that?
First of all, I forgot to mention that the U.S. military bought it to show on bases.
You've frozen up again, but hopefully you'll come back. You
So
froze up again. The military bases,
the U.S. military bought it to show on military bases around the world to the children of the soldiers because it was, nonviolent and had good moral values.
but now it's locked in a vault.
Yes, more or less.
So how did you attract award-winning filmmaker Nadia Tass to this project? Because she is known for her career in films and had won many awards as a director. And then all of a sudden, this is her very first documentary. So how did you attract Nadia Tass to this particular project?
So understanding the Soviet Union is a very difficult problem. And I really didn't think that we had the time to educate directors and editors and everyone else about the Soviet Union. So I went looking for people who were really talented but understood the Soviet Union. Nadia's grandparents escaped from the Soviet Union and they came to Greece where she was born. Or they had children in Greece and she was born to one of the children. And so she knew all about the Soviet Union. And that seemed like a perfect match in terms of a director. But the writer and the editors, just about everybody had a background. Either they'd already like filmed in Russia or filmed in the Soviet Union. They all had a background.
Interesting, interesting. I know the composer had a background in it, and also in that, and Nadia is Australian, so but even though she was born in Greece.
She was born in Greece and her parents were anti-communist and her father was a communist. In Greece, that was common in those days. So he got put into prison because he was a communist. And they finally said to him, if you leave the country, we'll let you out. And that's how she went to Greece. But she never forgot her Soviet roots.
Wow, wow, that's fascinating, fascinating. What was the most difficult part? You said you finished most of this before COVID. I'm sure that had, created its own problems. It has for most filmmakers I've talked to through that period of time. What was the most difficult part of putting together this documentary?
So we wanted to recreate his escape to the West. And just as we were about to do that, COVID happened and all these countries closed their borders. So we had to wait for the borders to reopen between what was once Yugoslavia and Austria. And the Australians made it very clear to Nadia that if she left to go to Slovenia and Austria, she had like a 6-month wait to get back into the country. She would have to be in quarantine.
Okay.
So she figured out how from her office in Melbourne, using modern technology to film that whole opening. She directed it, and the only thing she couldn't direct was the drone.
Wow.
She
That's
cast everybody. She rehearsed them. Yeah, I mean, she watched it as it was being filmed. She said, "No, do this and do that."
amazing. That's amazing. Yeah. So So your husband started this autobiography. Still in the process of finishing the autobiography. Is that correct?
So first of all, Google Translate. He writes too beautifully for Google Translate to give me any idea of what he was saying. So I like researched who's the greatest translator from Russian to English, and I found this woman in New York who's very talented. And she said, well, she's busy, but she would look at 10 pages. So she looked at the 10 pages and she said, I really love this, but I can't, I really want to do this. And this was like February. And she said, but I can't do it until October. I'm really busy with my other assignments. So I said, well, okay. And then she called me in April and she said I couldn't put it down. I finished it. And so with her, so now it's in the editing process. We're almost finished. I'm checking the editor now. So it's been edited by a qualified book editor. And when I finish my part of checking the edit, it's going to be published.
That's exciting. That's exciting because you're a writer. That's what your career was in writing. So, did you have a part in finishing this up and writing it?
Well, first of all, I had done a lot of the interviews, right?
Right, right.
And then, there were stories that Oleg didn't put in that I thought should be in there. So I added a little bit of this and a little bit of that. But basically, it's his voice, very eloquent, telling the story of a country we virtually know nothing about, and a kind of amazing childhood, despite the fact that it was poor and it was ostracized for most of the world, and you couldn't travel, and there were all these
Frozen up again.
bad.
You couldn't travel. I'm sorry, you froze up and you couldn't travel.
Um, I mean, I don't know if you remember, but after the perestroika, these beautiful drop dead Russian women who looked like they were from James Bond movies started arriving in this country. Do you think that they ever gave them visas to leave? No. So everything kind of changed,
It did change.
including politics
Yes, yes,
for a
yes, yes.
while.
So, what was it like being married to the most popular Russian film star?
You know what? I loved him. He loved me. I never had any doubt about that. And he repeatedly brought me all of these projects to help him with. And somehow I was able to do them. Don't ask me how. And so we were also like a team. And I think that's why it worked.
Yes, being good collaborators on these projects. That's true. Was there anything when you found out do you speak Russian, by the way?
I have about 200 words and they're all animation titles.
Okay, so when you got the translation of what he had written in his autobiography, was there anything in there that was surprising to you that you had never known about before? Or were there many things?
You know what? He had a very eloquent way of telling his story. I definitely could never have told his story in the way that he did. And I think that the Russians who read it are just, so pleased and, so impressed by his vision of life in that country and how he managed to get to where he did.
Amazing, amazing. Where can people see Olay?
So it is being streamed on Amazon Prime Video and with Russian subtitles, by the way, for anyone who needs them. And you just have to go up into Prime Video and type in Oleg or Oleg Vidov, and up it comes.
People seek it out because this is an actor that, as I said, not many Americans know about. But once you watch this, you'll want to know more about. You'll want to go see his films. He was in a film with Kevin Costner, correct? And what was
So Oleg was always cast for his looks, like
yeah,
a lot of Americans, right?
right.
So the Kevin Costner film was about the Soviet missiles that were put into Cuba, the Cuban Missile Crisis. And Roger Donaldson was actually brave enough to say, you know what, Oleg, I think you can do the part, but you don't look like the Soviet ambassador. So we're going to have to put makeup on you. And he said, fine. So they gave him this big nose and these big ears, and they changed him. So most of the Russians didn't even recognize him. They said, "Who's that Russian actor? Oh my God, it's Oleg Vidov."
You know, it was surprising when you see him in the documentary. You go, oh, is that still him or not? People, this is a fascinating documentary for anybody who loves movies, loves films as much as I do, and I know many of my listeners who listen to the show do love movies. Seek this one out because it is so unique and so different, and you'll learn a lot, and it's just this beautiful actor inside and out. So thank you, Joan, so much for being on the show and for sharing your story with us, and I wish you much success with Oleg.
You're welcome. I hope your readers go up on Amazon and watch it.
Yes, definitely. Go on Amazon. Great. Hey, for all of my loyal listeners, if you would like to support the Jan Price Show financially, you now can do that, and you can get a tax-free donation by doing that. You can go to creativevisions.org. That's creativevisions.org, and go into the podcast section, and you can make a donation there. But by donating to the Jan Price Show, you're also supporting independent and documentary filmmakers because a portion of that donation goes to those filmmakers. So support the arts by donating to the Jan Price Show and go to creativevisions.org. Thank you all in advance. Thank you, Joan, again for being on the show.
Welcome.